Okay, so we're very excited that you're joining us today for this workshop one in the series on learning design. And to tell you a little bit more about us, so I'm Nicola, I'm from UCT, and I'm based in the Center for Innovation in Learning and Teaching at UCT. And this is my colleague, Yolanda. So I'm going to hand over to Yolanda to introduce herself and also to talk about previous learning design workshops on Emerge Africa and how this taps into what we've learned from those.
Hi everyone. It's very nice to be here. I hope you can all hear me clearly. Yes, I'm just down the mountain from Nicola. I'm on the foreshore at CPUT in the building that houses architecture, interior design, and town planning. And recently I've become more interested in learning design um, through education of architecture. So I'm very happy to be presenting this series of workshops with Nicola. I think later on in the slides we're going to talk a little bit about the previous workshop, which was done with Granier Canole, a professor who's very important in learning and learning design education. And we presented, co-presented the workshop using her 7 C's of learning design. A little bit later, I'm going to talk more about that. But we've had questions and requests from people wanting to talk about this very much growing field and a very um, difficult um, and challenging topic. So yes, I'm going to hand back over to Nicola and just to talk about the workshop objectives, and then I will take over a little bit later on.
Okay, thank you, Yolanda. So a little bit about an overview of the workshop series. So today is workshop one, and we're going to be introducing you to a design thinking approach to learning design. We're going to look at the process and some wicked problems, and after that we'll have an activity on problem finding um, which we think is, often neglected. We want to all find solutions, but we don't spend enough time thinking about the problem or asking questions. So the first activity is really geared towards that. And then the second workshop is next week, so same time as this week's one. Um, and we're looking at concepts, analogies, and the activity here is centered around coming up with concepts. And this is known as the ideation phase in design thinking. And then workshop three, we'll look at some guiding principles and we'll have a discussion around precedent analysis. I'd also like to say that we'd love for you to take our pre survey, which I've linked to at the bottom over here. And I've also added links to the Emerge Africa forum. So the activities, answering questions around those, that is going to happen here in the Emerge Africa forums. We've also got a very nice collection of resources, and that's also on the Emerge Africa site. All right. So Sue says she's got an echo. Yolanda, you don't hear an echo. Oh, hi, Ayotola. I'm glad you're joining us all the way from Nigeria. Um, okay, so the workshop objectives. So for today, we're looking at thinking about why do we need learning design and how design and a design thinking approach differs to other approaches. We'll also introduce you to a learning design process with an emphasis on the early stages. Okay, so often we rush through learning design and we're not paying enough attention to the early stages. So this is why we're centering on that. Okay, so in the chat, I'd love for you to list some of the ways one can ruin a course. So how do we ensure that a module or course will fail? And then we're going to think backwards from that. So please, in the chat, if you could list ways that you think one can ruin a course.
Perhaps, Nicola, I can just add here that this is an activity that we are borrowing from Granier's 7 C's model, and we've used it before, and it may seem quite strange to ask such a question, But if you think about it, it actually helps you to uncover the opposite. So what about, yeah, what should you absolutely not do, or what should you do to ensure that you end up with a failed course, ruined one? Daniela saying lack of participants' engagement, interaction. Yes, definitely. They're passive and they don't participate. Rita saying thinking about the course from your own perspective. So you're not thinking about the learner. Yeah, Sue's saying the same thing. Not considering the recipient or the user or the participant. If you don't allow feedback, so you're just carrying on regardless. Yeah, resources without activities. Not creating space for engagement. What about the learner? Yes, materials delivery, instructional design. Planning in terms of constructive alignment, that's Rita. Claudia, we are asking participants to suggest ways in which you can ruin a course. So anything that, if you do that, you will ensure failure of the course or ruining it. It should be up on your screen. So just the first thing that comes to mind. Yes, if you're not well prepared, Rita, so you're nervous and then you actually, yeah, you mess it up. You're referring to a presentation as in a lecture situation. Rita, I suppose that is the context. Yeah, so lack of planning, not being consciously considering. Adekunde, are you saying you can't hear us? Nicolas, the sound quite low. Nicolas saying that sometimes we're not sure what it is that we want to achieve and we don't know what the options are. I'll speak up a little bit, but everything's in the text box anyway, so that's a good thing. Rita's saying we need clear learning outcomes. Yeah, perhaps we can talk about some themes, Nicola. I'm very pleased to not see a lot of stuff about technology and actually.
Yes, I must agree with you, Yolanda. It's a very big relief because I know a lot of people are also interested in online learning from the feedback we got to the pre-course survey. So we already see, design thinking is very much about a human-centered approach. So you're mentioning things around student engagement, um, and that's so important. And then there are also key, interesting, comments around lack of constructive alignment, um, not having clear outcomes, um, the lack of planning. Okay, so they're very interesting things here. So some of it's to do with the students, some of it's to do with the educator. So they're these very, they're different spaces where one can actually ruin a course. Yeah. So
Teacher
I'm
Claudia
gonna.
is talking about adaptability as well, about how do you an agility, kind of responding to the needs as they arise as well, which is interesting, as
Mm.
opposed to doing very clear planning ahead. It's not always possible to plan everything. Yeah,
Yes, and being able to improvise.
yeah.
Yeah, I see multiple people are typing. So let's first see. Okay, so incorporating technology. And sometimes how one incorporates technology doesn't really speak to the learning outcomes and things you hope to achieve. So you use something that you think will increase student engagement, but it might not actually work out for various reasons. Yeah, interesting point, Rita. Adekunle, you hear us fine? Okay, great. Okay, awesome. So basically, we all know how we can ruin a course and why I think this gives us a sense of why we need learning design. Okay, I just thought I'd move at this stage onto some of the feedback from the survey um, for your meanings of learning design. So some people said it's around the process for thinking about online learning, unpacking a course for effective learning. So things that have to do with process. Um, Other folks thought more in terms of curriculum design, alignment, talking about student engagement or creating meaningful and engaging learning modules. Others thought about templates for creating effective learning activities, so people doing things. Okay, so Adekunle, you've raised your hand. Um, can you type your question in the text box, perhaps? Okay, and we'd also like to just stress that with the we're not so much looking at we're not going to give you guys a set of templates. Our approach is quite different, but Yolanda will speak more to that. Um, okay, so I'm going to hand over to Yolanda. So even here with the feedback from the survey, we see themes emerging.
Thanks, Nicola. Um, yes, just to briefly say where we come from and why we are going to be saying what, actually what we draw on. It starts with Addie. As you all know, the Addie model, it's widely known in instructional design as a five-step process involving analysis, design, development, implementation, evaluation. But it is predominantly used in the development of multimedia content, the emphasis on content for learning. And it's therefore problematic because it's quite a linear process. It's not iterative. It focuses on artifacts rather than experiences. So we are more interested in the work of Julie Salmon, Diana Laurillard, Grania Knoll, I've mentioned, whose work focus more on learning activities, focusing on facilitation, encouraging scholarly practice, sharing, and discussion. Then, outside of education, we are interested in the work in the fields of architecture, product design, um, communication design, etc., through the work of Nigel Cross, Brian Lawson, Peter Rower, where design thinking is emphasized. So a move from kind of procedural to a more of a thinking idea-based approach. I did mention earlier that we ran a workshop with Grania Knoll using her, actually we only selected some of her 7Cs activities, and then we found in the workshop that we really had too little time to focus on the first stages of the design process. We realized that it is important to understand the problem, to conceptualize before rushing into selecting technology or methodology or planning the actual learning intervention. So this is what we're going to do in this series of workshops, is to actually move from understanding the problem to conceptualizing, so that you formulate a model that you can use to guide your decision making. So Grania is saying that the belief-based implicit approach should be replaced with a design-based explicit approach, and I think that's very important that we articulate and we make the process explicit. So there are many models available, and in the resources on the image site, you'll find a lot of links, and we will be adding links as we go along. And if you have interesting links that you want, or resources that you want to share with us, please do. There are loads of templates and processes and models that can be used in design, through instructional design and beyond in other disciplines of design. And they basically start with discovery, defining a problem, ideation, developing, testing, validating, and then implementing. So it works from one point, from the problem to the solution. And in whichever way, some of them are drawn in a cyclical aspect, and some are more linearly shown, and they do refer to iteration, but generally there's a move from problem to solution. And what we want to do differently is that we want to focus on the design thinking approach that is innovative and not procedural. When you go into an autopilot mode of just solving a problem, you miss out on the creativity and innovation and creating new solutions. We are suggesting that the process should be iterative and not linear, that we focus on the learning experience and not get stuck on the technology. And then ultimately, what learning design should be is a mindset and not a method. So what we've tried to graphically reproduce is this iterative process, which does not happen once but many times. So moving from the problem to the solution, you go through cycles of analysis, synthesis, and evaluation, but not in a single loop, in a series of loops. So if you look on the right hand side, starting with discovery, where you're going to find the problem, and we'll do an exercise related to that. You define it, you ideate, you develop, validate, and implement, but within that loop you have multiple loops, and you will probably need to return and go back to the problem, defining the problem as you move along. So the loops will return on themselves. We quite like the work of Brian Lawson. Um, and he talks about the problem and solution as being uncomfortable relationship with each other, kind of interesting relationship with each other. So it's not a clear beginning and end. You also need guiding principles to guide your decision-making process, and that's how the understanding the problem will actually guide you towards finding solutions. So we'll get back to the idea of a concept later on. That is an organizing principle or a model to direct your decision-making process. And in the second workshop, we will do a little exercise related to that. So basically, just to say, it's a very messy process, and it's meant to be like that. So um, Lawson also talks about the fact that it's complex, um, and it's we need to work backwards from the people, from the solution. That's what most of you were saying, in fact, in the first exercise that we did. So design is something you can't hold in your hand. It's not a thing. It's a process, a system, a way of thinking. Changes all the time. Difficult to define. All right, I see some interesting comments in the chat. Nicola is referring to Brian Lawson's book, How Designers Think, which is a really interesting, very valuable resource. And so what we need to focus on is the human aspect. You've already said that. Design thinking as the human capacity to plan and produce desired outcomes. Lawson talks a lot about the fact that that designers must dwell on the problem and not rush to solutions. He's saying that designers must be skilled in finding and stating problems and in understanding and exploring them. And this is often the stage that we totally neglect because we want to rush to solutions and we want to make things and we want to move on. Albert Einstein said, if I had 60 minutes to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes defining it and 5 minutes solving it. It's also been said that by the time that you so fully understand the problem, there can only be one solution to that problem. We often solve problems that that's not relevant, or we formulate solutions that don't relate to the real problem. So that's why they're called wicked problems. I'm going to hand over to talk a little bit about wicked problems.
Yeah, so even something like design and learning design are actually wicked problems, and wicked problems are really hard to define, and that's actually why they're so hard to pin down. So work on wicked problems, Horst Rittel is one of them, Richard Buchanan. There's so many people in a lot of different fields as well, whether it's business, um, uh, educational technology. It's become quite a vogue thing, talking about wicked problems. But the basic idea is that not only is it hard to define, but it's difficult to separate out from other problems. They can be unique, they can change, they can morph. So once you get, you think you find a solution, this problem then, becomes a whole set of other problems. Um, and there's, solving one aspect of a problem might reveal or create other problems. With wicked problems, it's seen as the opposite of tame problems. So tame problems have a quick fix. So there's no, template for tame your wicked problem in 7 easy steps. Okay, so it's something that that's why they're so hard to solve. Another reason is because there are multiple um, stakeholders. So everyone might be seeing the same thing, but these problems, they might see something different, or even some of the stakeholders themselves might be invisible. There could be conflicting views around what is the problem, solution, even the involvement of the various stakeholders and the roles they should play. Um, Sometimes, there's a lack of consensus about what this wicked problem really is, um, as well as a range of gaps. Okay, um, but in order to solve something, we need to make sense of the problem. So a problem until a problem is defined, it can't be designed for. And another interesting things about wicked problems is that they really resist resolution. And solutions can be neither right or wrong. Um, and they can either be multiple or they might be impossible to solve. Okay, so they can be wicked problems can be big things like poverty, design, or it could be smaller things, more narrowed down, like student engagement in a particular course. Okay. So some of our wicked problems are based on things that you guys added to the survey. Here's what we identified as some of the wicked problems that you guys are dealing with. So active or meaningful student learning, collaborative learning, increasing access to a course, class issues around classroom management, massification, and flexible learning spaces. And often when you try to solve it, say for example, you try to use a particular tool for student learning, that tool then creates more problems. Um, so that's often the 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 idea we're getting at here. So I'm gonna hand over to I see people are typing. I'm eager to see what you're gonna say. Um, have any of you heard of the term wicked problems before? Some other contexts? Okay, negative tone when thinking about human subjects. That's a very interesting critique, Rita. Yeah, thinking about people as problems. I'm going to hand over to you, Yolanda.
I think, yes, thanks, Nicola. Yes, the term problem is also problematic. Some people prefer to talk about challenges, but ultimately, you know, I suppose, yeah, we always come back to the idea of problem. Then solution is also a tricky term because it seems simple. In the text chat, I just added the interesting discussion, and we can talk about that. That is, namely, what is the difference between design and problem solving? Is design problem solving, or is it more than just problem solving? Is it about finding a solution or making a solution? Yes, Mulweni is saying solution implies there's a fixed answer, like you go into a shopping center and you have to just select the right answer or solution. Often the solution does not exist, so it's not a question even about selecting it. You have to create it, and that's for me where or how design is different from problem solving. Yes, Rita's saying that's if we're thinking of students as a problem, um, emotions, the human aspect is certainly important. Yeah, and that's what we found with the 7Cs model. It can become quite procedural in the way that you apply it. So what we're wanting to say is, yeah, you can refer to as many models as you want to, but it's about how you think about it. So let me just talk about the problem solution issue. I think this is, well, the key of today's webinar is Lawson puts it quite nicely. He doesn't show a linear model at all, but he talks about how we move gradually from the problem to the solution space through analysis, synthesis, and evaluation, and toggling between those two. He talks about this curious relationship between problem and solution, and the, understanding the problem is not something that we can step off and move on. We need to keep going back to understanding the problem. And what he says is that as the solution is revealed or uncovered or developed, we understand the problem better. So the problem crystallizes as we move along in this iterative process. So there's always this negotiation between problem and solution. And I quite like these diagrams. So just to get back to our graphic, what we're going to start with is in this red oval shape, discovering the problem, but considering the fact that we need to keep going back to learning more and more about the problem as we work towards the solution. So we may start with a problem, but we need to constantly refer back to it. Now, problems can look different from whichever way you look at it. You can different people can see different aspects of a problem, and it's all about how you see that problem that will determine the solution at the end. So Lawson writes, in this in the problem-solving view of design, these skills include the ability to reformulate and give structure to ill-structured or wicked problems. That's in the problem-finding activity. Whether we think of it as a reformulation of problems or the identification of elements, making them explicit and developing their characteristics. It's clearly an important and central design skill, and that's a process that we often just skim over. We jump to conclusions, we think we understand the problem. We don't look at the problem from different perspectives. We need to frame the problem, we need to frame the problem in different ways, and then we um, understand the inevitable contradictions in the design by giving structure and direction to thinking. And that, I think, is the essence of, of the process as Lawson frames it. Good. I'm going to hand over to Nicola again to talk about the live brief, and then perhaps we can respond to some of the main questions in the chat.
Yeah.
Nicola, I think you're still muted.
Oh, sorry. Thanks a million, Yolanda. Um,
Okay.
okay. So we've got a live brief for you guys on corporate HIV/AIDS training. What we've found is that with these learning design sort of online seminars, people often work with their own problem and then don't really learn from one another. Um, so we thought, okay, rather give everyone the same problem to work with collaboratively, because that's really in essence what design thinking is about. Also about working in a team, communicating with people in different disciplines. So as I've mentioned, Yolanda is from architecture and I'm from media studies, and just when you come together, you're able to see wicked problems differently. Okay, so this live brief, here's the first part. A large corporate client approaches your learning design team. So we're all going to be part of this learning design team. And we're supposed to design a learning experience intervention to educate staff on HIV/AIDS, 3,000 employees across 2 cities and 5 sites that need to be trained. The objective is to train staff to be aware of health issues, and also to address stigma and hopefully change their mindset about the epidemic. The second part is that the target audience consists of people who are mostly graduate, but they have a limited experience of e-learning, and previous e-learning exposure was often compulsory. So they might have a negative, or we could ask that as a follow-up question. But employees are based in different departments, and they represent a range of age groups from 20s to 50s. However, the time commitment for this training should be no more than 1 hour. So what a challenge. So in addition to this, we're going to talk about inactivity one. In addition to this brief, what else do we need to know in order to discover the problem and properly define this brief? So we'd love for you guys to just ask questions um, and about what other information you need. What are the things that you'd ask the clients? Um, what are some of the wicked problems that you can identify? Okay, sorry that that's there twice. I don't know why. Um, and then how do we make sense of this information? So where we'll be engaging with this is in activity one on the emerge forums. But yeah, it'd be interesting even we might use this opportunity or maybe to address questions, but also I don't know, Yolanda, if you'd like to sometime if we'd like to start this activity um, in the chat and then move to the forum.
I think so. I think it would be valuable, Nicola, to think about problem finding, based on this problem. Get started in the chat now, and then we continue in the forum. Um, as as we think about the problem, in your mind's eye, you may think about the solution already, or think about possible solutions, or think about similar problems. And that is the way that we toggle between the problem and the solution phase. So it's really, there's no such a thing as a silly question at this point. And in the framing the questions, you can also start to look at alternatives. What about this? Why not? So the what and the why and the how questions can help you to frame the problem, and frame the problem from different perspectives, different angles as well. There we go. Rita's got interesting comment about language. Yeah, so I don't want to be repeating everything that goes said in the chat, so we can just perhaps take some time, focus on the chat, text chat. And what we can do, Nicholas, we'll take this text chat and we will convert it into the kind of transfer it into the forum so that we can carry on with the discussion.
Wow, so we've got some really interesting questions coming through. So should I keep this up here, I think, where I've got the two parts? Yes, Claudia as well. How sensitive are they? And perhaps does the training around HIV/AIDS, does it involve people talking about sex in a work uh, place scenario, where people might not feel very comfortable? So does the training, perhaps does it require a safe space? So even from some of the really interesting questions we've got here, we can already see themes emerging. Things around resources, issues around the people, um, so how they feel, how sensitive they are, or and also their background, previous e-learning, things around time, and the start and end date. Um, okay, so Sue also says the reason for them needing this training. Okay, so the stakeholders, what is the interest, and in whose interests are being served? Is it just does the company just want to be able to say, well, we've offered our staff this training? Okay, so in business, they often talk about the customer journey. Okay, so what are they going to, so Sue mentioned how they're going to use the knowledge afterwards and where they're going to apply it. So sort of imagining, from the training to afterwards. Hi, Sipo. Okay, so Rita's suggesting that cultural background also plays a role in HIV/AIDS training. Okay, cool. Thanks for joining us, Daniela. Yes, super. So the recording will be made available and will be continued. We'll continue this discussion in the Merge Africa Forum. I think I'd also just like to mention that at this point that our next online workshop will be on the 12th of May. So that's Tuesday next week. And the time is also from 12 till 1. And here we move into the next phase and we look at design concepts and we come up with a range of concept analogies and apply them to the this learning design challenge. So what do you want your HIV training to be like? Should it be like The Amazing Race, or is it a treasure hunt or shopping experience? So we'll talk more in detail about that. Um, and also, I think what we're missing here, we've got great questions, and they're sort of, by asking questions, we're getting closer to coming up with this wicked problem or defining it. So, and we'll talk more about these sort of what principles can you use to define your wicked problem. Yolanda, would you like to say something more about workshop 2?
Yes, I think what we'll do next is we'll transfer this information into the forum, and then we can unpack the different aspects as group them and then unpack them, because in defining the problem, you don't need to you must continue until you've exhausted the problem fully, rather than stopping short of discovering possibilities. So we want to push this process a lot further, although there's been very interesting comments already. So I think if you would all be willing to participate in the forum, that would be great, so that when we move on to conceptualizing, we have got a clearly defined problem or problems to work with. And what will happen is that in your conceptualization, you will refer to your framing of the problem. So there's a link between the two and referring back to the problem again. So yes, I think we can we can do a lot more work in the forum after this workshop and before we meet again next.
Yes, and I'd also like to just mention that we've also got a forum where you can share your wicked problems. So some of the so like this, and we can sort of collaborate around one another's um, uh, wicked problems and learning design challenges. Come up with questions and those kinds of things. So please feel free to share your pitch your learning design challenge for the group. I think that would also add a nice dimension because we're all coming from different contexts and have unique, wicked problems are always unique, but we all face our own learning design challenges.
I see Sue is asking about the forum, and we're referring to the forum on the eMerge site. If you find the Learning Design 2015 event, you will see a heading forums, and there are 6 questions. Thanks, Nicola, for the link. So you just follow that link. Um, there's a forum thread for every activity, and there's also a thread for introductions, a separate one for your own learning design problems. And if you have any questions related to terminology or concepts or literature, then you can also ask in there. So we look forward to engaging with you in the forums. And please go through uh, if you find the time, through the resources that we've linked for you. And if you have questions or you have suggestions for more resources, I think it would be really valuable if we could share resources and learn from each other in this workshop series.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Rita. Um, we're glad you found it to be a wicked start. Hi, Rising. Um, yeah, so the meeting recording will be available on the Emerge site as well in due course. And I think if you guys we'll, as Yolanda mentioned, we'll share the text chat, and then we can continue with this interesting activity 1 in the forum. We also have a Emerge Facebook page. Okay. But we're mainly going to be working on the activities in the Emerge forum. Okay. References for Lawson and Cross. Okay, we'll add those, Claudia. Great, but we just want to say thanks again to everyone for joining us. And we look forward to continuing this discussion and to our workshop number 2 next week.
Just to respond to Claudia's question, to prep for next week, I would say participate in the forum in problem finding, so that when we move to the conceptualization activity next week, that we all have a clear understanding of our interpretation of the problem.
Okay, so this is the official end of the meeting, so I'm going to stop the recording. But you guys are welcome to continue chatting. Bye bye.
Bye bye. Thanks, everybody.